After an eventful 2024 NBA draft, the Portland Trail Blazers came away with two players that look like they're going to be a part of their young core for years to come. As about an hour before the draft started, they traded for Deni Avdija from the Washington Wizards, giving up the 14th pick, a 2029 first-round pick, as well as Malcolm Brogdon. And then with the 7th overall pick, took Donovan Clingan out of the University of Connecticut. And let me just say, I love what the Portland Trail Blazers did in this year's NBA draft, outside of selling second-round picks for cash so that Jody Allen can pad her pockets. Not only do both of these moves add some skills that I like in front court players moving forward, it also raises some questions about the future of a couple of veterans on this Blazer team moving forward. Draft night changed everything for the Portland Trail Blazers, but before I jump into that, make sure you tune in for our free agency live stream tomorrow, going live about an hour before free agency starts. We'll have live Twitter feeds on screen from Shams and Woj, and we will break down every free agent signing as well as every storyline regarding your Portland Trail Blazers. It's also very likely that the Blazers are not done trading this offseason, so if a trade happens, we will go live as soon as possible to cover it. Now let's just talk about the Deni Avdija trade. We had a live stream that started right after this trade, so we've already talked about it on air. But just a quick synopsis, I love this deal from Joe Cronin. I think this is the best trade that he's made during his tenure as Portland Trail Blazer GM. Deni Avdija was not a guy that I expected the Wizards to trade this offseason. He looked like he was going to be a key part of their core. However, the Wizards valued that 14th pick they got back, and they drafted Bub Carrington who's a young high upside guard that I really like for them. And they also have a couple of forwards right now with Kyle Kuzma, who's more of a veteran, and Bilal Coulibaly, who was a rookie last year and looked pretty dang solid. I think Malcolm Brogdon can be a good guard mentor for Carrington, and overall, I don't think this is a horrible trade for the Wizards. However, I really like it for the Blazers, as Deni Avdija averaged 15 points per game last year, almost 8 rebounds, and almost 4 assists, and also is a really good versatile defender. He's basically that do-it-all forward that the Blazers have been missing since they lost Nicholas Batum. And I really like the way Avdija fits moving forward. He can play some point forward, he can play off the ball, he's a capable cutter, he's just somebody that is solid in literally every area and should upgrade the Blazers defensively from day one. Ultimately, he can play the 3 or the 4. I kind of like him a little bit more at the power forward spot, and if I was the Blazers, I would be looking to move off Jeremy Grant and get back as much value as they can get for him in a trade. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but the other positive for Deni Avdija is his contract, as next year he starts a 4-year extension that he originally signed with the Wizards before last season, and this extension is a good one. And in this extension, next season he's making $15.6 million. The season after, it goes down to 14.4. The season after, it's 13.1, and his final season in 2027-2028, he's making $11.9 million. Yes, his salary goes down, and it's a bargain considering the type of production that Avdija showed last season. He's still 23 years old, so he's still improving, he's still going to get better. So this contract, as it declines, is going to look like a phenomenal value, especially considering the salary cap is going to rise tremendously as the NBA puts in place a new TV rights deal. Ultimately, the Blazers long-term can have a core set in place with Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe, Deni Avdija, Toumani Camara, Donovan Clingan, and whoever they draft in the next couple of drafts, and they could have max cap space on top of that. Part of the reason is because Deni Avdija is a good NBA player already, will be a starting forward for this team, and with everybody else being young and on rookie deals, that's a really good spot for the Blazers to be in, especially if they can flip some of their higher-priced veterans for future first-round picks. Deni Avdija fits perfectly with a timeline that involves the Blazers having multiple future firsts, a bunch of cap space, and a really good young core. If he was making what he probably should be making in upcoming seasons, then the Blazers would have a little bit less of that flexibility. So it makes sense for Portland to pursue it. But before we talk about who should be going out, let's talk a little bit about Donovan Clingan. I wasn't as high as others regarding Donovan Clingan leading up to this draft. However, I'm pretty happy to get him with the 7th overall pick. There were rumors that he'd go number 1 to Atlanta, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Blazers had Clingan number 1 on their entire big board, as they liked him during last year's NBA draft process. Clingan, of course, elected to go back to UConn, won another championship, and the Blazers have kept really close close tabs on him during this entire time. He's a high character guy, a selfless teammate, and could be the defensive anchor for the Portland Trailblazers for the next decade. At 7'2" with a 9'7" standing reach, the Blazers needed some size up front. One day they're going to have to deal with Victor Wembanyama in a playoff series. Having a guy like Donovan Clingan that I think can move his feet just well enough to defend in space and can protect the rim is a key piece to compete in the West long term. Clingan's jump shot apparently looked very good in the private workout that he had with the Portland Trailblazers, and in workouts he seems like a very capable shooter. He was only 2 for 8 last year from behind the arc. For UConn, he didn't shoot many, and when asked about why he didn't shoot much, he put it simply, and I'm paraphrasing, that he's willing to do whatever it takes to win and whatever his coach tells him to do. He's not somebody that's going to complain about his role, going to complain about his touches, going to complain about his minutes. This is the type of guy that is really good to bring into a locker room and can help create a culture. Not just a selfless culture, but a defensive one. And that's something the Blazers haven't had in quite a long time. Clingan's going to come in, work his ass off, and he's going to come in and immediately improve this Portland Trailblazers defense. And that is something that is very exciting. Overall, I like the combination of Avdija and Clingan because Avdija could be the Blazers' best point of attack defender, and he's a versatile one, and then Clingan is their best rim protector on day one. Defensively, both those guys should help out this Blazer team a ton, but then also both of them can pass. Avdija, as I said, averaged almost 4 assists, and Clingan showed some serious passing flashes, playing in a very intricate UConn offense last season. I actually think UConn's offense is probably more complicated than the Blazers' offense under Chauncey Billups. Clingan should have no problem making the right pass, making the right play in this Blazer offense, and it's pretty hard to find 2 high-level, potentially elite defensive players that provide passing upside as well. And if that's the identity the Blazers are trying to forge in their front court, then I like that. Those traits are really good to have in role players playing next to a star backcourt. Hopefully the Blazers can develop that star backcourt in the coming years. And that's why I loved what the Blazers did on draft day, and that's why I think it completely changes this team going forward. Of course, this raises questions about both Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton's future on this team. I think it would make sense for the Blazers to shop Ayton right now in order to clear a starting spot for Donovan Clingan. I know he's a rookie, but he's ready to play right away. I don't think he's going to have the same struggles as Scoot Henderson did last year because Clingan isn't going to have to run an NBA offense, and his strengths should be strengths from day one, which are his size and length and protecting the rim and making the right play. The Blazers have Uprise and Robert Williams III on this team. If they traded Ayton, you would still have some solid center depth. You wouldn't have to play Clingan a ton of minutes. And if Robert Williams III gets hurt, of course, Uprise can play some backup center minutes. We saw that last year. I like Clingan getting starting level reps against NBA caliber bigs from day one. I think that would be good experience for him after having some very high level experience playing for UConn the past couple of seasons. And if the Blazers could flip DeAndre Ayton for a couple of expiring contracts and a first-round pick if they're lucky, then they'd save about $35 million in cap space next offseason. Now, if they can't get back anything for Ayton, then it may make sense to go forward into next season with Ayton and Clingan backing him up. Long-term, Clingan is the starting center on this team. Ayton is not. Chauncey Billups in the press conference for Donovan Clingan brought up that he may experiment with playing both those guys together. He also referenced a lot of teams that play 2 bigs together. I don't like that at all, though, as all the twin tower combinations that Chauncey Billups referenced, at least one of the bigs could shoot threes, and at least one of the bigs was okay guarding the perimeter. I think both Clingan and Ayton are better defensively at the 5 and not well suited guarding the perimeter as their primary defensive role. So I don't think either of them defensively make much sense at power forward. And then offensively, Ayton is a mid-range maestro, but has never developed into a three-point shooter. Didn't attempt a single 3 for the first 40 games last season. I have no faith in DeAndre Ayton ever becoming a three-point shooter. Maybe this is the year he finally does it, but I feel like we've been having that conversation regarding Ayton for 5 to 6 years now. If it was going to happen, I feel like it would have happened by now. His shot is very flat, which does not translate well behind the arc. So if you're playing those 2 bigs together, you're hoping that Donovan Clingan in year 1 can knock down NBA threes. I think that's too much to ask of Clingan. And if you're playing 2 non-3-point shooting threats on the floor, it's just going to clog the paint for Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe. And then if you run a pick and roll, say with Scoot and Clingan, Ayton's defender is just going to be able to sit in the paint and disrupt that entire pick and roll, and it just clogs things up for the guards. And ultimately, I don't think playing Ayton and Clingan together is the best thing for Donovan Clingan, but also not the best thing for the Blazers' young guards as they try and develop. Scoot and Sharp need more floor spacing. They don't need to have to drive into a super packed paint all the time. And some people think that Ayton can space the floor by knocking down mid-range shots. However, if he's hanging around the elbow, his defender is going to have a very easy time stunting on pick and roll drives and just disrupting plays and still being able to get back to Ayton. Also, Ayton standing there is a driving lane that a guard is unable to take. It's just clunky. It clogs things up. I don't like that combination on the floor. I think when Chauncey Billups experiments with it, it's not going to go too well, and it's probably something he would shy away from later on in the season. So if the Blazers don't trade DeAndre Ayton, then it makes sense to trade Robert Williams III. I don't think the Blazers can get any value back for him, but ultimately, if you have Rob Will, if you have Clingan, if you have Ayton, the Blazers probably are either not going to play Robert Williams next season, or they're going to play Robert Williams or DeAndre Ayton too much at the power forward position, which both scenarios don't sound good to me. It would make sense just to get whatever you can for DeAndre Ayton or Robert Williams. And as I said, if you can get expirings for Ayton, that's a lot of money you save next offseason, and that also applies to Jeremy Grant. I like Deni Avdija better at the 4. I like his defensive rebounding better at the 4 than Jeremy Grant's, and he's a guy that can grab a rebound and push the pace as a point forward and help the Blazers increase their pace. Jeremy Grant isn't somebody who really does that, and I've lamented Jeremy Grant not doing the little things well enough. Those things being making the right pass, rebounding the ball, and then defensively, I have not been impressed with Grant in Portland. I think he's above average guarding forwards. However, the Blazers have spent a lot of time putting him on guards, and he just struggles getting through on-ball screens. Avdija is much better in that regard, so I think he can switch down the lineup easier, and starting Avdija at the 4 gives more minutes at the small forward position for Shaedon Sharpe if he has to play it if Anthony Simons returns. I don't think it's likely that Simons returns, but it might still be possible. And then, of course, you got Toumani Camara that can play the 3. Defensively, I really like his combination with Avdija. You also have Delano Banton and Matisse Thybulle who can play some 3. So you got some players at that position. If you're also playing Avdija there, that's a bit of a logjam, assuming they might still play Thybulle or Banton. And even if you don't, in order to get Camara enough minutes, one of him or Avdija are going to have to slide up to the power forward position, where the Blazers also have a first-round pick from last year in Chris Murray, as well as potentially Jabari Walker. So to me, it makes sense to trade Jeremy Grant. I'm a little bit worried about Avdija not getting enough touches if Jeremy Grant is still on this roster. If DeAndre Ayton's still here, and then you got Scoot, Sharp, maybe Anthony Simons, that's a lot of guys that are going to take a lot of shots, and Avdija played his best basketball last season when he was used as a point forward, bringing the ball up the court, creating for himself, creating for others, and making plays happen. He is the most dynamic front court player in that regard by far. I know Jeremy can score, but he's not somebody that sets up other players like Avdija does. He's not a ball handler like Avdija is. So ultimately, I would like for the Blazers to cash in on Jeremy Grant's value. I think they'll at least be able to get back a first-round pick, hopefully 2. Maybe it's a first-round pick and a young player that makes sense. I'm not sure. But by trading Jeremy Grant, you open up minutes at the 4 for Camara or Avdija. You also open up touches and shots, which makes things work a little bit easier. You can get back that future draft capital, and as I said, if the Blazers get back expiring contracts for Grant, then that is over $30 million that they'd save next offseason. If the Blazers are able to do that for Ayton and Grant, then you could be talking about the Blazers having some legitimate cap space next offseason. And I know it's Portland, and in a rebuild, you're probably not going to sign a star-level free agent, but, I mean, Paul George is taking a free agent meeting with the Orlando Magic this year. So if the Blazers look okay next year and have money to give somebody that might not get a max contract but might make sense for the Blazers to bring in, then maybe you can talk about them making a little bit of a splash and actually being competitive for years to come. More likely, though, is the Blazers could have the flexibility to make moves to add to their young core if the move made sense, or they could accumulate assets by taking on salary with draft picks attached. It would just be a better financial situation for the Blazers moving forward, and they wouldn't even necessarily have to use that cap space long term. They would need to reach the salary floor. You could always sign a 1-year contract for a player just to reach that floor, and then maybe they're a trade asset at the deadline, and you could just have a ton of flexibility moving forward, and part of that is due to Avdija having a declining contract that is a really good value for his production. Anyway, let me know what you think of Avdija and Clingan down in the comment section below, and let me know what you think should happen with Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton and how the Blazers sort out their rotation for next season. And then tomorrow, we're going to have that free agency stream. Should be a lot of fun. We'll be live for probably 8 hours in a row discussing all the signings, moves, maybe some trades as well. So hopefully you can join us and hang out with us. That should be a lot of fun. And with that being said, I'm out of here. I'll catch you next time. Until then, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.